He came soaked in rain and silence, his golden fur darkened with dirt, his breath ragged, his eyes burning with something no one could name. Strapped to his back was a little girl, cold, still broken. And yet, he never let go. No sirens led him, no orders guided him. Only love, only memory, only the promise he made to someone long gone. What followed wasn't just a rescue, it was a revelation. If your heart stirred even a little, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and stay to witness the full journey of the golden soul who refused to give up. The early morning mist curled low across the empty streets of Hollow Creek, Colorado, a quiet mining town nestled in the shadows of the Rockies. It was the tail end of winter ice clung to the power lines, and frost glittered on the hoods of parked trucks like the breath of ghosts. Snowbanks lined the sidewalks, still gray from last week's storm. Outside the Hollow Creek police station, the air was eerily still, save for the occasional groan of a distant wind pushing against shuttered windows. At exactly 5:47 a.m., the silence shattered. The heavy glass doors of the precinct slammed open so hard they rattled on their hinges. Officers turned, half reaching for their weapons, until they saw the figure in the doorway. It wasn't a man, it was a dog, a large golden retriever, his coat once honey-colored, but now soaked with mud and streaked with something darker, rust red, almost black in places. Blood, perhaps, or dried sap from pine bark. He was limping heavily every breath, wheezing from a chest that had clearly been pushed past its limit. But strapped to his back, secured with what looked like strips of torn clothing and a child's scarf, was the crumpled body of a little girl. Her limbs hung limp. Her face, pale and streaked with grime, was partially hidden by matted curls. One hand clutched a small dirt-covered plush rabbit. She wasn't moving. The dog took 3 faltering steps into the lobby before collapsing in a thud that echoed off the marble floor. His head stayed upright, golden eyes locked on the nearest officer. Behind the front desk stood Sheriff Donna Ray, a tall woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a no-nonsense braid. Her build was wiry, her jaw sharp. Donna had served 2 decades in Denver before returning to her hometown after her husband died in a rafting accident on Clear River. Since then, her sense of justice had turned from hard law to quiet protection. She rarely smiled, but when she did, it was for children and stray animals. And this was something she'd never seen. "Call paramedics," she said sharply. "Now." She stepped forward, slowly lowering herself to one knee. The dog's eyes didn't waver. His lips curled back slightly, not in threat, but in warning. "Touch her, and you'd better mean well." "Easy now," Donna whispered. "You did good, sweetheart. Real good." The commotion drew others from within the station. One of them was Agent Kyle Turner, a federal investigator stationed temporarily in Hollow Creek for a missing persons task force. He was in his late 30s, black hair always slightly disheveled, as if constantly running his hand through it. Broad-shouldered ex-military Turner gave off a quiet but magnetic presence, someone who didn't waste words but spoke volumes with his eyes. Beneath his professional exterior, he carried the weight of a failed case involving a kidnapped child, 2 years prior, something he never spoke about but never forgot. As paramedics rushed to lift the girl onto a gurney, Kyle crouched beside Donna and the dog. "Is that Lila Thompson?" he asked, voice low. Donna's mouth twitched. "I think so. Lila was the granddaughter of Walter Thompson, once a Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist. His daughter, Sarah Thompson, had been presumed dead after a suspicious house fire 3 years ago. Her body was never found. Since then, Walter, now well into his 60s and struggling with early-onset Alzheimer's, had withdrawn from public life. Lila had been in his care after her mother's disappearance. No one had seen her for 4 days. "And the dog?" Kyle asked. "I don't know," Donna murmured, "but I think he brought her home." The dog still hadn't moved. His breathing was shallow, erratic. Blood pooled around his front legs, and yet his amber eyes never left the stretcher. Not when the medics pressed defibrillator pads to Lila's chest, not when they wheeled her through the doors into the ambulance bay, not even when one of the officers tried to coax him with a piece of jerky. He ignored them all, until Kyle leaned in and said gently, "She's safe now. You can rest." Then slowly, painfully, the dog lowered his head to the floor and let out a breath that trembled with exhaustion. He didn't close his eyes. He was still guarding her. Kyle stood up, glancing at Donna. "We need to know where he came from." "He's not just wandering in," Donna said. That's not luck, that's intent. Just then the entrance door opened again this time, not with force, but with purpose. A woman in a dark FBI windbreaker stepped in, raincoat flapping at her knees. Her black boots left watery prints on the tile. Special Agent Cassidy Reynolds was in her early 40s, tall, composed with auburn hair, tied into a neat bun, and sharp hazel eyes that missed nothing. Known for her ability to read animals and crime scenes alike, Cassidy had grown up with a retired canine father who taught her that dogs always told the truth, you just had to listen. She knelt beside the golden retriever and studied him carefully. He's trying to tell us something, she whispered. Then, the impossible happened. The dog stirred. Despite the blood loss, despite the pain, he stood. Wobbly but firm, his legs shook as he turned toward the door. He paused, looked back at Cassidy, at Kyle, at Donna, and in that moment, there was no mistaking the message in his eyes. Follow me. No one spoke, no one dared. They simply grabbed their gear. Let's go, Donna said. Kyle turned to one of the medics. Keep her stable. The dog's leading us somewhere important. Cassidy followed her gaze, never leaving the trail of faint red droplets the dog left behind, as he led them out into the snow. They didn't yet know his name. They didn't know what horrors he had fought through, but they knew one thing already. This wasn't just a dog. This was a witness, a guardian, maybe more. And whatever he had survived, it wasn't over yet. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft hiss of the oxygen machine and the occasional beeping from the monitor beside the bed. Morning light filtered through thin blinds, casting narrow gold bars across the floor. Hollow Creek Memorial Hospital was not a large facility, but it was sturdy and calm, the kind of place where people believed in healing more than headlines. And today, in room 204, something extraordinary was beginning to stir. Lila Thompson opened her eyes. For a moment, she simply stared at the ceiling. Her gray eyes, dulled by days of captivity, blinked slowly against the harsh white lights. A nurse standing nearby gasped in relief and called for the attending physician. But Lila didn't look at the nurse. She turned her head slowly and whispered a single word. Aspen. Across the hallway, Kyle Turner stood outside the observation window, arms crossed, his eyes heavy with sleeplessness. Cassidy Reynolds joined him a moment later, sipping burnt coffee from a hospital cup. She's awake, she said softly, and Kyle didn't answer, just pressed his forehead against the glass, exhaling hard. Inside the room, the golden retriever was curled in a tight ball near Lila's bed. His bandaged leg trembled occasionally, but his ears perked the moment she spoke. With effort, Aspen lifted his head and looked at her. No bark. Just a quiet thump of his tail. Dr. Helen Marquez stepped in, mid-50s, petite, with warm brown skin and hair tied in a bun with a red pen stuck through it. Known in town for her gentle voice and unshakable steadiness, she had treated everything from mining accidents to child fevers with the same level of care. She examined Lila's vitals, murmuring softly, then turned toward the team waiting outside. She's weak, dehydrated, a little disoriented, but responsive. I'd say we have maybe 20 minutes of clarity before the exhaustion wins. Cassidy and Kyle stepped in. Lila watched them with a level gaze, the remnants of fear still lingering at the corners of her expression. When Cassidy introduced herself and asked if Lila remembered anything, the girl nodded slowly. There was a room, she began, her voice no louder than a whisper. Underground. It smelled like wet metal and cologne. Really strong. Like the one my mom hated. Kyle leaned in. Cologne. Lila nodded again. She always said it reminded her of danger. She used to joke it was too expensive for good men. Then her face tightened, and her small hands clenched the hospital blanket. I smelled it. The night she died, too. Cassidy exchanged a glance with Kyle. The reference couldn't be ignored. Sarah Thompson's death had been ruled accidental, unconfirmed cause, but most believed it was an arson gone wrong. No suspects, no witnesses, except one. Aspen. Cassidy knelt beside the dog and gently brushed her fingers through the fur behind his ear. Is that when you found him, Lila? After your mom? No, the girl murmured. He found me. At the shelter. I didn't know him, but he looked at me like he remembered everything. Cassidy froze. You didn't know him before, Lila shook her head. But I think he used to belong to Mom. A nurse entered, signaling the end of visitation. As Cassidy and Kyle stepped out, Kyle muttered, "That changes everything." Outside the hospital, the sky had darkened again, clouds thick with snow rolling in from the mountains. The wind picked up, carrying with it the sharp scent of pine and ash. Cassidy pulled her jacket tighter. "We need to speak to Walter Thompson," she said. "Now." Walter Thompson lived just on the edge of Hollow Creek in a weathered two-story home hidden behind untrimmed hedges and a collapsed wooden fence. The porch light was broken, and the mailbox leaned drunkenly toward the street letters still poking out from the day before. Kyle knocked once, twice. No answer. They were about to turn back when the door creaked open. Walter stood there slightly hunched, wearing a thick flannel shirt with one sleeve rolled unevenly and mismatched socks. His face was gaunt with a strong jaw and cloudy blue eyes that once held the world in them. A camera hung around his neck, an old Canon model with cracked casing, and he looked at them as if trying to decide if they were real. "Mr. Thompson," Cassidy said. Walter blinked. "Have you seen her?" His voice was gravelly but urgent. "My Sarah. She said she'd bring Lila home." Cassidy took a breath. "Sarah? She passed away 3 years ago, sir. But we found Lila. She's safe. She's at Hollow Creek Memorial." Walter leaned against the doorframe. His shoulders dropped and he exhaled shakily. Then he did it. The dog. Aspen. He remembered. Cassidy asked gently, "Did he belong to Sarah?" "Yes," Walter murmured. "She rescued him after a trafficking raid in Portland. Said he'd been trained overseas military work, we think. Quiet, smart, stubborn as hell." His lips twitched upward for the first time. "She said he didn't trust anyone, not until Lila." Kyle leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, your daughter was investigating something before she died. Do you remember what it was?" Walter's face fell. "She didn't tell me everything. Said it was too dangerous. But I found her notes. Locked them away, in case." Where Kyle asked. Walter glanced past them toward the overgrown backyard. Under the bench, the one with her name carved on the side. Cassidy followed his gaze. "Can you show us?" Walter hesitated. "Sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't." "That's okay," she said, guiding him gently inside. In the backyard, snow had begun to fall. They found the bench a moss-covered slab of cedar under a maple tree, and beneath it, wrapped in a weatherproof bag, a stack of notebooks, photographs, and USB drives. The files were marked with dates, names, and strange symbols. Cassidy flipped one open and read aloud, "Crowley. Green Pines Initiative. Youth programs, possible cover for recruitment." She looked at Kyle. "This isn't just personal. It's a network." Kyle's jaw clenched. "And we just found our starting point." That night back at the hospital, Lila drifted into sleep with Aspen curled beside her. In her dreams, the sound of her mother's voice came not as a memory, but a promise. "You're not alone. You never were." The morning after Lila's second day of recovery came, with a bitter chill. Snow had fallen silently during the night, blanketing Hollow Creek in a white hush. Tree limbs drooped under the weight, and rooftops wore clean lines of frost. The roads had been plowed early by the town's maintenance crew, but the cold lingered, biting through jackets and stinging noses. At Hollow Creek Veterinary Clinic, the air inside was warm, filled with the soft hum of machines and the scent of antiseptic and animal fur. Aspen lay in one of the larger recovery kennels, his side wrapped with gauze and IVs, feeding him a slow drip of fluids. The vet in charge, Dr. Owen Mahler, was in his late 40s, stout and slow-moving, but gentle with animals. His rounded shoulders and permanently tired eyes gave him the look of someone who carried invisible weight. He had worked in Hollow Creek for nearly 15 years and was known for his quiet kindness and long silences before speaking. Owen had once served as an army medic before switching to animal care, claiming animals were better patients. "They never lie about pain," he often said. Cassidy and Kyle stood outside the kennel. The GPS tag they had fastened to Aspen's collar blinked steadily on Cassidy's phone screen. "He hasn't moved in hours," Kyle noted, arms folded. "Maybe he finally understands he's safe." Cassidy tilted her head, watching Aspen's still form. "No, he's waiting." "For what?" She didn't answer, because right then, Aspen's eyes opened. He didn't bark or whine. He simply stood slowly, wincing against the stiffness, and stared directly at the door. Then, with unexpected strength, he backed out of his enclosure, nudging the latch loose with his snout. It clicked open with a soft, metallic snap. "Wait, what the hell?" Owen exclaimed, rushing forward. But Aspen was already moving. His stride was uneven, clearly painful, but driven by something unshakable. He headed straight to the exit and pawed once at the door before looking over his shoulder. "Open it," Cassidy said without hesitation. Kyle stared at her. He just had surgery. "He doesn't care," she replied. "And we both know that dog doesn't run without reason." Owen hesitated but finally opened the clinic door. Snow blew in around their feet. Aspen stepped out, nose lifting to the windtail low, but focused. Then he started walking, limping with determination through the frost-covered parking lot and down Main Street, following a scent no one else could detect. Cassidy activated the tracking app on her phone, noting the signal broadcasting in real time. "He's headed west." "Where does that lead?" Kyle asked. Owen spoke for the first time since opening the door. "Old mining routes, haven't been touched in years. Closest thing out there is a collapsed shaft called Granger's Hollow. Locals call it Devil's Step." Cassidy's eyes narrowed. "He's not going for a walk." They jumped in the car and followed. Meanwhile, across town, Walter Thompson sat alone at his kitchen table, a thin blanket wrapped around his shoulders. The sunlight through the frosted windows cast long, slow-moving shadows on the wall. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to read a note someone had left him. "Lila is safe. You are safe." He read it twice, lips moving slowly. Then, as if some thread had pulled taut in his mind, he whispered aloud, "Mabel Ridge." He blinked as if hearing the name for the first time and stumbled toward a drawer near the sink. After some effort, he retrieved a dusty envelope marked Sarah, last file. Inside were old photographs, a map with red circles and a worn brochure from a place called Mabel Ridge Youth Home, a facility shut down in the late 1990s under ambiguous circumstances. Sarah had circled one phrase on the flyer, "Building strong futures for vulnerable youth." Walter mumbled, "She found something there." She knew. He clutched the envelope and made his way out the front door, coatless, into the snow. Back with Aspen, the tracking signal showed him cutting off the main road into the forest that surrounded the old mining district. Kyle and Cassidy followed as far as they could by car, then continued on foot, boots crunching through the snow. Aspen led them through twisted pines and frozen underbrush, every movement more strained than the last, but never slowing. They reached a ridge where an old sign had been half buried by snow. Cassidy knelt and brushed it off. "Granger's Hollow." "Keep out. This is it," Kyle said. "Where miners went missing. It was closed in '83 after a cave-in." Aspen stood at the mouth of what looked like nothing more than a collapsed entryway nose pressed into the snow near a pile of jagged rocks. He pawed once then again, until Cassidy noticed the rocks weren't natural, they had been stacked to hide something. With Kyle's help, they pulled the top layer away and revealed a rusted steel hatch. Cassidy tried the handle, locked. Kyle produced a crowbar and began working the mechanism loose. Aspen stood back watching, but alert. When the hatch finally gave way, a cold draft rushed out, damp, stale, and tinged with something metallic. Cassidy shined her flashlight down the narrow tunnel. "This goes somewhere." Aspen barked once, then again, urgent. Back in town, Walter had wandered to the sheriff's department, where Officer Mara Jensen recognized him instantly. A junior officer in her late 20s, Mara was petite with short blonde hair and a youthful face that often made people underestimate her. She was resourceful, known for her sharp memory and calm under pressure. "Mr. Thompson," she asked gently, taking the folder from his shaking hands. "Where did you find this?" Walter looked at her with surprising clarity. "My daughter died because of what she found. She left me this to finish it." Mara flipped through the contents and her eyes widened. "I need to get this to Cassidy." As the sun dipped behind the hills and shadows stretched long across the forest, Cassidy and Kyle descended slowly into the darkness beneath the ridge. The tunnel walls were damp and cracked. A few steps in, they found broken crates, decaying ropes, and then something more chilling. A child's shoe. Next to it, a fabric bracelet embroidered with the letter E. Kyle's face turned pale. "This is real." Cassidy's flashlight scanned the floor ahead. Then she froze. "Look," she whispered. There, imprinted faintly in the packed, snow-dusted earth, were paw prints. Fresh. Aspen had been here before. They had found the place. They hadn't yet uncovered the horrors inside, but they had found the path in. The air inside the collapsed shaft was different, thicker somehow, and colder than the world above. Every breath seemed to echo against the narrow walls as Cassidy and Kyle moved deeper into the earth, their flashlights casting long, flickering shadows that made the stone walls seem to twitch and breathe. Aspen walked a few paces ahead, his nose to the ground, moving slowly but deliberately. Despite his injury, he made no sound, his tail-low ears alert the dust of old silence clinging to his golden coat. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, the remnants of old mining tools and rotting timber bracing against one cracked wall. A steel door sat crooked in the far end, half open, rusted at the hinges. Cassidy motioned for Kyle to cover her, and the two approached it carefully. Aspen paused at the threshold, then growled softly a warning, but not of danger present. It was memory. Cassidy pushed the door wider. Inside was a small windowless room, maybe 10 by 10 feet. The walls were lined with marked scratches etched deep into the concrete and stone. Some were small, scattered, others repeated almost rhythmic as if someone had been keeping track of time. In the far corner lay a broken plastic crate with remnants of blankets and a child's backpack faded pink and torn. Aspen padded over to it, sniffed the cloth, then sat down beside it, ears drooping. This was her room, Cassidy said quietly. Lila was here. Kyle knelt by the scratches on the wall. These aren't random. Look, some are shaped like letters. Cassidy traced her gloved fingers across one row. Lila. Then beneath it in smaller, messier lines, help me. Kyle stood. We need photos of this. Documentation. If there's DNA, blood, anything, it's probable cause. They radioed for backup. While they waited, Cassidy turned to Aspen. You found her once, and you brought her out. How Aspen stood, walked to the wall behind the crate and began to scratch. The sound was soft, but insistent. Kyle watched as flakes of dust fell from the seams. There's something behind that, he said. They cleared the debris slowly and uncovered a false panel. Nothing high-tech, just a wooden section designed to blend in. Behind it was a narrow vent shaft, barely wide enough for a dog, certainly not for a child or adult. Cassidy looked down it with her flashlight. That's how he got in. Aspen had crawled through that shaft to reach her. No one trained him to do it. He simply had. Back above ground, Walter Thompson sat in the attic of his home, lit only by a single lamp. The room was dusty, filled with the quiet stillness of old grief. He was kneeling beside an old cedar chest, the kind used by soldiers and immigrants dented by time and travel. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, maps, and a small wooden box tied with a faded red ribbon. He untied it and opened the lid. Within were manuscripts, typewritten pages, margin notes, scribbled in blue ink, and a series of Polaroid photos, some blurry, some hauntingly clear. One showed a man in a press suit standing outside the Maple Ridge facility. Another was a screenshot from a surveillance camera time-stamped 6 months before Sarah's death. And then there was the voice recorder. Walter stared at it. His hands trembled as he pressed play. Sarah's voice crackled to life, soft, measured, the voice of a woman who had grown into danger. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. Dad, I'm sorry, but I got too close. The people behind Maple Ridge are still operating just under different names. Green Pines Initiative, Hollow Creek, Youth Outreach, all of it funded by Crowley's office. I've traced money through shell charities, and I've found evidence they're moving children through the old mines. They think no one remembers them. Walter's breathing hitched. He fast-forwarded through static to another segment. I left what I could at the cabin, the one in Bramblewood. The codes, the names, it's all there. But if you go, don't go alone. Back at the mining site, backup arrived FBI tech agents, crime scene investigators, and Hollow Creek deputies. Leading them was Lieutenant Harris Vaughn, a tall man in his early 50s, square-jawed with peppered stubble and eyes like chipped ice. Vaughn had a reputation decorated war veteran, now a no-nonsense field operations lead. His loyalty to the law was unshakable, and he harbored deep resentment for officials who abuse public trust. He shook Kyle's hand firmly. You think this ties to Crowley? Cassidy handed him a copy of the file Walter had passed through Officer Mara Jensen. We don't think, we know. Vaughn didn't flinch. Then we make it stick. The team documented everything: claw marks, fabric fibers, child belongings, even a cracked watch that had Sarah's initials engraved on the back. Forensics worked quickly, packing samples into evidence bags under Vaughn's orders. Cassidy moved outside for Air Aspen, following quietly behind. The sun had begun to set, casting lavender over the snow-covered forest. She knelt beside Aspen and touched his collar gently. You remembered all this. After years, you waited for someone to listen. Behind her, Vaughn's voice barked commands. Kyle stood nearby, reading through the files from Walter's chest. One image made his brows knit. It was Crowley, but not recent. This one was dated nearly 20 years ago. He was standing beside the founder of Maple Ridge. Kyle turned to Cassidy. You said Sarah found something big. It's generational. Cassidy's expression hardened. Then we finish what she started. That night, Walter left his house under police protection. Cassidy and Kyle took the files directly to a secure FBI storage center in Denver. But before leaving town, Cassidy wrote one line in her notebook under a heading Sarah had once written in her own hand: "The truth always finds a way out." The snow had thickened by evening, cloaking the forested edge of Hollow Creek in a ghostly silence. The ground crunched beneath heavy boots, and the wind whispered through the trees like a warning carried by the past. Under the waning light of a pale moon, Cassidy Reynolds moved carefully through the old mining corridor, Aspen padding ahead with deliberate focus. The dog's posture had changed. He was tense, tail lowered, nose sweeping in quick zigzags as if every scent held a clue. They had followed a new path off the main shaft. Aspen had doubled back earlier in the day, stopping suddenly at a moss-covered wall that, upon closer inspection, concealed the outline of a doorway buried behind a false panel of stone and bramble. It was this instinct, the unshakable awareness of a place he hadn't forgotten, that had led them here. Cassidy stopped just behind him, flashlight trained on the rusted metal door now exposed. A faint red X had been spray-painted over it hurriedly, and only partially covered by snow. Someone marked this recently, she muttered. Kyle, following close behind, narrowed his eyes. Could be an access route they're still using. They exchanged a quick glance and readied their weapons. Aspen whined low, then pawed at the earth with anxious urgency. Cassidy leaned forward to test the handle. That was when the ground beneath them gave way. A concealed tripwire snapped taut under her boot, and the trap was instant. A steel grate camouflaged by snow swung open beneath Aspen and Cassidy. Kyle managed to grab Cassidy's arm, but Aspen tumbled down a narrow chute before anyone could stop him. His yelp echoed through the hollow, followed by the distant crash of something solid hitting rock. Kyle shouted, pulling her back. "Are you okay? I'm fine, he's not," she said, breathing hard, already pulling out her radio. "We need immediate extraction. Canine agent down. Trap was prepped. This place isn't abandoned." Meanwhile, Aspen rolled to a stop in a lower chamber, dazed and bleeding from a fresh cut above his eye. He pushed up slowly, legs shaking, and took in his surroundings. This room was different, clean, active. There were crates stacked against one wall, unlabeled but new, a cot, empty food trays, surveillance monitors dimly lit in a corner. He wasn't alone. A shadow moved just beyond a row of shelves. Aspen's ears perked and his muscles tensed as a figure stepped forward, tall, wrapped in a parka face hidden beneath a scarf. The man stared down at him, eyes narrowed. "Well," the voice muttered, "didn't expect the damn mutt to come this far." Aspen growled. Across town, Lila sat by the hospital window legs folded beneath her. She watched the falling snow with the quiet stillness of someone listening for something no one else could hear. Beside her, Officer Mara Jensen stood holding a cup of cocoa, trying to pretend everything was normal. "I'm not going back to sleep," Lila said suddenly. Mara looked down. "You don't have to. Want to talk?" Lila shook her head. "Someone's coming. For me." Mara frowned. "You're safe. There are 2 officers downstairs. Cameras. You're protected." But Lila wasn't convinced. He doesn't like to leave things undone. She didn't say who. She didn't need to. That same night, in a rundown apartment above a quiet bookstore in Boulder, Claire Monroe tapped away on her aging laptop. The light from her desk lamp cast soft shadows on the wall behind her, revealing shelves cluttered with investigative files, press badges, and a map filled with pushpins and strings. Claire, a 32-year-old freelance journalist with a stubborn jawline, sharp features, and short ash-brown hair tucked into a loose bun, was used to chasing what no one else would print. She had been a student of Walter Thompson's once, and still remembered the way he'd paced in front of his lectures, quoting Hemingway and Hunter S. Thompson in the same breath. When his name flashed on her cracked phone screen that morning, she answered without hesitation. What he gave her, photographs, recordings, bank documents, and ledger entries, was enough to confirm what she had suspected. For months, the Green Pines Initiative was a front. On the surface, a non-profit aiding youth rehabilitation. In reality, a laundering system for trafficking operations running through rural Colorado. Claire leaned back, eyes narrowing. She opened a new file and began typing, "The Hollow Creek Cover-Up, How One Town's Savior Was Its Greatest Threat." Back in Hollow Creek, Benjamin Crowley stood in his office sipping whiskey as his assistant, a wiry man in his 40s with slicked-back blonde hair named Lennox Gale, read from a printed sheet. "She's still in the hospital. Guarded. But there's an opening tomorrow during the shift change." Crowley paced his expensive wool coat still dusted with snow. His face was lined but handsome in the way TV anchors trusted square chin, salt and pepper hair, an air of calm leadership. But, in private, his voice grew cold and clipped. "I want it quiet. A power failure, something simple. Just long enough to get in. No more mistakes." Lennox nodded, and the girl Crowley didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, watching the snowfall in golden halos under the street lamps. "Make it look like a medical accident. Stress-induced seizure. Natural, clean, and the dog." Crowley's jaw tightened. "Kill it. Underground." Aspen had backed into the far wall, limping but upright. The man in the scarf advanced holding a stun baton, but just as he swung it downward, Aspen lunged not at the man, but at a box beside him. His weight sent it crashing into the monitor's, sparks flying. The screen flickered violently, casting erratic light across the walls. The distraction was enough. Aspen ducked under the shelving, disappearing into a side tunnel. He ran blindly, each breath a fire in his chest, every step agony. But he didn't stop. He had to get back. Above, Cassidy and Kyle managed to open a maintenance door and descend into the same network of tunnels. Following Aspen's blood trail and GPS signal, they soon came upon the broken monitors and crates. Kyle scanned the room. They were just here. Cassidy found a security badge on the floor. L. Gale. She held it up. "He's working for Crowley. He's not just complicit, he's on the ground." Meanwhile, Walter, back in his home, under protection, pressed send on an encrypted file transfer to Claire. Then he picked up his rotary phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a mechanical voice answered. "Verification code," it said. Walter, voice steady. For once replied, "Echo Sierra 94 Tango." "Confirmed," said the voice. "Upload in progress." He hung up and turned toward the window. Snow continued to fall. "Let them come," he muttered. The sky above Hollow Creek had turned an angry gray snow, thickening again, into an icy shroud, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Down below, deep within the labyrinth of abandoned mining tunnels, the air was hot metallic and laced with smoke. A fire set deliberately had begun to spread from the far side of the underground storage area, licking its way toward the outer shaft. It was meant to be a diversion to scatter attention and burn the evidence. But it would become something else, the spark of justice. Aspen, his golden coat darkened by soot and matted with dried blood, crouched behind a stack of wooden crates. His ribs moved with each strained breath, but his eyes remained sharp, fixed on the two men patrolling the corridor ahead. They wore dark tactical jackets, their faces partially hidden beneath masks, rifles slung carelessly as if used to no one ever challenging them. Lila was somewhere nearby. He could smell her fierce sweat and the faint lingering scent of the lavender soap she used. But there was another scent too. Someone new. A child. From a cracked vent to his left, Aspen heard a soft sob. The guard closest to the vent turned, suddenly alerted by the sound, and stepped forward. His boots clanked against the metal grating. That was when Aspen moved. With a low guttural growl, he lunged from behind the crate's jaws, aimed for the man's forearm. The guard shouted and staggered, swinging wildly with his weapon, but Aspen clamped down hard, dragging him off balance. The second guard reached for his sidearm, but a second figure emerged from the shadows. Agent Kyle Turner, who struck with precise force, knocking the weapon free and driving the man to the ground with a sharp elbow to the throat. The fight was quick, violent, and over in seconds. Kyle crouched beside Aspen, who limped toward the vent. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew they weren't alone." He reached forward and pulled the vent cover loose. From within, a pair of eyes stared back, wide, green, and full of terror. The boy inside looked to be around 8 years old, small for his age, with shaggy dark hair and dirt streaking his cheeks. He hesitated, then crawled forward slowly. "It's okay," Kyle said. "You're safe now." The boy didn't answer. He only looked at Aspen, who pressed his nose gently to the child's hand. That was all the boy needed. He lunged forward and clung to the dog, burying his face in Aspen's fur. In another part of the tunnel, Lila crept silently along a narrow passage, gripping a flashlight and a folded paper she had found hidden behind a loose panel in the wall. It was old and yellowed, but the handwriting was unmistakable her mother's. The map drawn on it showed a route of final escape path leading to a hidden exit through the southern shaft. Sarah had always planned ahead. As Lila reached the end of the corridor, a sound stopped her. She froze, heart hammering. Someone was coming, but instead of footsteps, it was a soft panting, followed by a bark. "Aspen," she cried, dropping to her knees as the dog came limping around the corner. He nearly collapsed into her tail, thumping once before he dropped his head into her lap. Kyle followed close behind with the boy tucked in his arms. "We have to move," Kyle said, eyes scanning the smoke-thickened air. "The fire's spreading faster than expected. They're trying to bury it all." Lila pulled out the map. "There's a way." Mom marked it. They moved quickly, Kyle leading with his flashlight, Lila clutching the boy's hand and Aspen limping at her side, refusing to fall behind. They reached the junction. Sarah had drawn a section of the mine, reinforced with concrete. A rusted ladder bolted into the stone wall, leading upward into blackness. As Kyle began helping the children up the ladder, Lila turned back to Aspen. "Can you make it?" Aspen hesitated, looked up, and then stepped forward. It was slow but determined. One step, then another. By the time they reached the surface, the tunnel behind them had begun to groan, the supports giving way in bursts of falling rock and smoke. They emerged into the edge of the forest behind Hollow Creek's reservoir. Emergency lights flickered in the distance as local responders and FBI agents scrambled to contain the chaos below. Meanwhile, across town, Claire Monroe sat across from a man in a dingy motel room just outside of Boulder. His name was Don Avery, mid-40s, former Marine turned private security contractor, once hired as head of internal operations for the Green Pines Initiative. He was tall with a square jaw, a military buzz cut, gone gray at the edges, and a haunted expression that hadn't faded in years. He looked down at the folder Claire had placed on the table, photos, contracts, payment ledgers. "I saw the kids," he muttered. Not all of them were on the lists. Some were just ghosts. "Then help bring them back," Claire said, her voice unwavering. Dawn looked up, meeting her eyes. "They'll come for me." "They're already burning the tunnels," she replied. "This is your last chance to mean something." He hesitated, then signed the statement. By the time the FBI raided Crowley's secondary safe house in Pine Hollow, Don Avery's confession had already been filed. Walter's documents, Sarah's recordings, Claire's article, and forensic evidence from the tunnels were all aligned. Crowley was still missing. Back at the field command post, Cassidy debriefed Kyle as paramedics tended to the children. Lila sat beside Aspen, who lay wrapped in a thermal blanket. His breathing was labored but steady. The little boy, now identified as Miguel Torres, sat silently nearby, refusing to let go of Aspen's tail. "We found the last shaft," Cassidy reported. "The burn was coordinated. If we'd been 10 minutes later," Kyle nodded. "We weren't." Cassidy turned, watching Aspen rest. "He's the reason we weren't." Snow drifted across the porch steps of the Thompson house, layering the world in soft, white silence. The warmth of earlier moments' rescue survival relief had thinned into tension, stretched like a wire ready to snap. Inside, Lila stood at the window, with her arms folded tight against her chest, her eyes locked on the street beyond. Something felt wrong. Then she heard it, the soft thump of paws on snow. Aspen. He limped into view from the far end of the street, his golden coat streaked with soot, his muzzle still caked with dirt from the tunnels. But there was no hesitation in his steps. He was moving with purpose. Lila flung the door open before he reached the porch. Aspen. But the dog didn't greet her. He stopped 2 feet from the steps and barked a single sharp command. Then he turned and began pacing in tight circles. Something was happening. Inside the living room, Walter sat in his worn armchair, hands resting on the pages of an old family Bible. His breathing was slow, eyes glassy, as if the fire from the tunnels had smothered whatever clarity he'd held. But as Aspen's bark echoed a second time, he stirred. A whisper escaped his lips. "He's here." "Who's here?" Lila asked, kneeling beside him. Walter's hands trembled as he reached into the Bible. From between Psalms and Proverbs, he pulled a folded slip of paper, yellowed brittle. She left it here, said it would matter when the last door opened. On the page was a series of numbers handwritten in a looping cursive. Coordinates. And beneath them, 3 words. Old South Wing. Lila's brow furrowed. "That's the old wing of the high school. It's been closed for years." Just then, a loud crash shattered the stillness. The back door burst inward and Walter's chair tipped backward as a figure lunged into the room. Lennox Gale Crowley's right hand pale and narrow-faced, his eyes frantic. His coat flared behind him, revealing a pistol, drawn and ready. "Get away from him," Lennox shouted. Lila froze. Aspen growled teeth-bared, placing himself between them. "You don't understand," Lennox said, stepping closer, gun trembling slightly. "He has what they want. I don't care," Lila said, her voice rising. "You're not taking him." Walter, still seated, coughed violently. "Let her go," he wheezed. "This isn't about her." But Lennox ignored him. Before another word could be said, Aspen charged. Lennox fired, but the shot went wide. The dog slammed into him, knocking the pistol to the ground. Lila dove forward, grabbing the gun and sliding it across the floor. A second later, the front door burst open, and Agent Kyle Turner stormed in, weapon drawn. Hands in the air, Lennox stumbled up, cornered breath, ragged. "He has the drive. He has all of it." Kyle cuffed him quickly, then turned to Walter. "Are you all right?" Walter looked up slowly, then held out the piece of paper. She left the rest at the school. Later that evening, under FBI escort and with emergency lighting flickering from temporary generators, Kyle and Lila entered Hollow Creek High's Old South Wing. The school had been abandoned since mold, and electrical failures rendered it unsafe a decade ago. Lockers were rusted bulletin boards sagged, and posters for prom nights long past curled yellow against the walls. They moved in silence, guided by the coordinates, and a hand-drawn map Lila had found tucked into one of Sarah's old notebooks. At the end of a narrow corridor, a room stood with its number scratched off, only faded tape, and a cracked frame remained. Inside, desks were overturned, and books lay rotting in mildew. But Aspen, who had followed them despite his injuries, walked directly to the back wall. He sniffed once, then began scratching at a loose panel. Kyle moved forward and pried it open. Inside was a fireproof case, small and metallic, sealed with a biometric lock. Lila stepped back, eyes wide. "That was Mom's. She told me if I ever found it to press her ring into the scanner." The ring, still on a chain around Lila's neck, clicked softly as she pulled it free and pressed it against the reader. The case opened. Inside was a flash drive, a photo of Sarah holding baby Lila, and a letter. Cassidy's voice crackled over the radio. "We have a location, a cabin west of the reservoir. Heat signatures inside, possible hostage." Kyle nodded. "Copy that. We'll join soon. We have something." Lila unfolded the letter. Sarah's handwriting was familiar, every loop and stroke like a whisper from the past. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't finish what I started. But you can. What's on this drive is everything: names, dates, the shell companies Crowley used to hide the money. It's the final piece. I couldn't protect you from everything, but I left you a way to fight. Trust Aspen. He remembers what people forget. Love, always Mom." Lila stared at the page for a long moment, then whispered, "She knew." At the cabin near the reservoir, Walter sat tied to a chair, blood dried along his temple. His captors were distracted, arguing over whether to stay or flee now that their operation had begun to unravel. Their leader, Darius Mott, was a stocky man with a deep scar running across his left cheek. Former militia, now mercenary for hire, Mott had been one of Crowley's oldest enforcers, specializing in cleanup jobs. He was ruthless, calculating, and above all, loyal to money. But outside through the trees, flashlights moved, boots pressed into the snow. Aspen was the first to appear in the clearing, followed by Kyle, Lila, and half a dozen FBI agents in tactical gear. The team moved in silently, surrounding the cabin. Inside, Mott's radio crackled. Target located. Execute. He never got the chance to answer. The back window exploded inward as agents breached from all sides. A quick firefight broke out. But Mott and his men were subdued within minutes. Walter was freed, and Lila rushed to his side, clutching his hand. Outside, Aspen stood watch beneath the stars. The truth had been buried, scattered, hidden across a town unwilling to see. But now it had a voice. The courtroom was packed, the tension brittle as frost underfoot. Hollow Creek citizens had waited for months, some for years, for this day. The trial of Benjamin Crowley had begun 2 weeks ago, but today it would end. Crowley sat at the defense table, no longer the picture of the charismatic mayor. The sharp suits were replaced by standard-issue gray, his hair unkempt, face gaunt. The aura of control that once wrapped around him like a tailored coat had withered, leaving only a bitter shell. Across the room, Lila sat with her grandfather, Walter Thompson. His hand trembled slightly in hers. His eyes were unfocused now, wandering as if searching through memory that no longer served him. His Alzheimer's had accelerated since the rescue. Some days he didn't remember his daughter's name, but today when Lila walked him to his seat, he had looked at her and whispered, "You have her eyes." On the witness stand, Claire Monroe testified calmly, her voice clear, unwavering. She recounted the series of events, the evidence Sarah had collected, the testimony Don Avery provided, and how the charity front known as Green Pines had been exposed as a multi-state trafficking operation. Her words painted a trail of exploitation, deception, and cruelty, one that led straight to the man seated in the defendant's chair. The prosecutor, Melinda Kane, a black woman in her early 40s, with short natural curls and sharp assertive diction, delivered the closing arguments. Melinda had a reputation as a fierce litigator, known for her moral clarity. "What stands before us is not just a man," she said, gesturing toward Crowley, "but a system he built. A machine run on silence, fear, and shadows. But those shadows were never strong enough to hide the truth. Not from a child, not from a dog, not from a mother who gave everything to shine light where others looked away." She turned toward the jury. "And now it is your turn to stand in the light." The deliberation lasted less than 2 hours. When the jury returned, their verdict echoed across the courtroom, like a stone dropped in still water. Guilty, on all counts. Crowley didn't speak. He simply stared forward, jaw clenched, as the judge sentenced him to life without parole. Behind him, several of his former allies, bankers, officers, administrators, were already facing their own charges. One by one, the house of cards collapsed. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps of the courthouse. But Lila didn't stop. She held Walter's arm and walked him straight to the waiting car. Aspen, waiting in the back seat, perked his head up as they approached, tail thumping once against the door. His coat had regained some of its golden luster, though his left hind leg still bore a faint limp. At nearly 6 years old, he moved with quiet dignity, like a veteran whose eyes had seen too much. That evening, a town hall was held in Hollow Creek's restored community center. The mayoral seat remained vacant, but the gathering wasn't political. It was personal. Cassidy Reynolds stood at the podium, first her arm still in a sling from the final raid. She thanked the townspeople for their patience and the agents who had worked night and day. She ended by calling up Aspen. He walked slowly to the front beside Kyle and Lila. A plaque was unveiled beneath a mural painted by a local artist. A golden dog standing at the edge of a dark forest light, shining behind him. It read, "To Aspen Guardian, Witness Hero. You led us home." The room rose to its feet. There were tears, applause, and silence too, the kind that only comes with healing. Later that week, Lila sat by the window of her bedroom, flipping through the first printed copy of her book. She had titled it, "The Golden Trace: How a Dog Taught Me to Be Brave." Its pages told everything from the day Aspen appeared to the night they escaped the tunnel, to her mother's voice whispering through ink and memory. Walter sat beside her, humming a melody no one else recognized. He didn't speak much now. Some days he thought Lila was Sarah. Some days he asked where his typewriter had gone. But on the day she gave him the book, he traced her name on the cover with his finger and said, "Your mother would have been proud." One morning, as winter melted into spring, the three of them walked to the lake, the same lake Sarah used to take Lila to when she was little. The ice was gone, the sun warming its way across the thawing hills. The surface shimmered with light, and Aspen stood at the water's edge, watching the ripples with calm awareness. Lila reached into her coat and pulled out the small voice recorder, the one from Sarah's old case. She pressed play. Her mother's voice, warm and steady, drifted through the still air. If you see that dog, the one who never gives up, then you're not lost. Not really. That dog is your compass, and love is your map. Walter chuckled softly. That sounds like her. They stood there for a long time, Lila, Walter, and Aspen wrapped in silence, bathed in light. The snow had melted, but the trace remained. Sometimes the bravest heroes walk on four legs and speak only through loyalty. Aspen's journey reminds us that love, even when silent, can lead us through the darkest tunnels. In real life, hope often comes not with grand gestures, but through quiet companionship, small acts of courage, and those who choose to stay. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below and subscribe to our channel for more real stories. What would you have done if you found Aspen by your doorstep? Let us know in the comments below.